So, as David did say, my name is Jacob Porter. I am the Climate Adaptation Coordinator for the City of Thunder Bay. And so, essentially, I work to try and make sure that the City of Thunder Bay is better prepared for the changes that come from climate change. And today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process of putting together a climate adaptation plan, and why it's important, and take you through the steps from starting, putting together the background research, the planning, how to start taking some of the actions that you decide on, keeping track of those actions, and then we're going to try and wrap it up a bit. So to start with, climate adaptation, like a climate adaptation plan is useful because climate adaptation is hard. Climate change is this big global problem, but the impacts of it, how it actually affects people, is felt on a very local level. And the responses and the actions that you can take to combat this and to minimize how negative this is or to take advantage of opportunities also is a very local thing. Something that might help out one community might not help out another or might even harm it. As well, the impacts are wide-ranging. I already know you've heard from Rob on health impacts, you have heard on the impacts on wildlife, on food systems. And there are so many impacts, no one is an expert on all of them. But the cool thing with planning is that because it is so broad, most people have knowledge on something and they can contribute their knowledge to saying, what are the problems? And most people are in a position to help out somewhere along the way. So creating an adaptation plan is useful because you get to bring together all of this different knowledge, bring together all these different abilities to get at something that has more knowledge than any one person and has the ability to plan for more action than any one person can do on their own. And also make sure that the actions that you do make sense for the community and aren't just something that is for Thunder Bay or for, heaven forbid, Toronto. Now, as you get started, I'm going to approach this as I'm laying out some of the tools that I used and that the city's used even before I got into my position to help put together the climate adaptation plan. But whenever I talk about a different step, whenever I talk about a different strategy, I want you to think about it just like that, a tool. You use tools for the jobs where it makes sense and where you think it will help you get the job done. But if you don't think it's a fit, if you don't think that this is what your community will need, or this is something that your community that will be helpful in your community, you can change it. It's open. There are a few frameworks, like I put 3 here on my slide, that help guide you through. Most of them have similar steps where it's, you start out, how do you get started? Getting the information, trying to figure out what our future risks are, what our risks are now. Finding actions, taking actions, and then keeping track of what goes on. So again, with these different frameworks, even though most follow the same order, you'll see on some of them, they actually have arrows where you bounce around between stages. Because as you do one, you're going to find more information on another. So while this is a useful way to think about things, use what works for you in your planning process. So I'm going to start with getting started. So the group here is, well, This is our previous climate adaptation working group. So now we have some new members like Erica. But the reason why I focus them is because one of the first steps of putting together a climate adaptation plan and taking climate adaptation actions is finding some champions and putting together a team. In each community, there are going to be people who really care about this and who get it, who want to contribute to climate adaptation, to overcoming some of the climate change risks. And once you start finding some of them, they're going to be the ones who help you out and help make this into a bigger process. And one of the key areas where they're going to do that is getting some leadership support, which is also in this getting started section. Leadership can be council, leadership can be elders, whatever leadership means in your community, though council definitely helps out. And also as you're getting started, you are figuring out what has already been done in your community. You don't want to be doing things over and over again, like ignoring earlier reports that were done. You get to use all of it. So at this stage, where you're getting some people involved, you're figuring out who might be involved, figuring out, getting the leaders supporting you, and figuring out who's already been doing work. From there, you get started with the research. And with research, this starts, well, in this stage, you're trying to figure out what are the changes that have already happened and will happen in the future, and what are the impacts from those changes. And again, no one person has all this information. A way that has worked out well for a lot of groups is you start off with your champions and they put together a list of who might be impacted by this, who might be impacted by flooding, who might be impacted by changes in traditional foods, who might be impacted by health risks, or who might be willing to contribute. They go out, talk to them, ask if they'd like to be involved, and follow it up by asking who they think should be involved. So by spreading this out, and each person that they recommend, ask who they think should be involved. And this helps bring together a wider range of people with a wider range of knowledge to help contribute to a plan. It's also important to notice that, or to note, this might not just be people who are really passionate about climate change. You also want to include people who aren't as enthusiastic. You want to involve people who may be naysayers, may say climate change doesn't impact me. But if you focus on what are some of the impacts you're looking to improve, say, we are trying to look at reducing flooding in this community. We are looking at improving access to food. We are looking at improving the health of the people in our community. You can split it up into different topics if it works for you, but make sure that when you're talking to people about this, you make sure that this speaks to them and that they are willing to talk on something that is passionate, that they are passionate about, that they care about. Because the impacts of climate change are wide-ranging, so you do need a wide range of people to be involved, but not all of them know that they have something to contribute to a project like this. It won't help the community very much without that community knowledge, elder knowledge. How are these changes going to impact this community? What changes have happened in the past? You can have an absolute expert come in, a scientific expert, know what weather changes are going to occur. But some of those changes, the community might not care about as much. some of them that the scientists, because in a bigger city, they might not have as large of an impact, like the community may care about deeply. And you need that local knowledge, the experience of elder knowledge to help guide this process, to focus on what the actual impacts will be. And in Thunder Bay, the method that we used first and foremost was having workshops, having reports, having these in-person meetings. But the output from this research stage doesn't just have to be reports, or the input doesn't have to just be reports. You can have photos, you can have arts. You want to capture what the impacts are to your community in any way that works for your community. These are pictures from the Thunder Bay Photo Boys project, right, where people from the community are taking pictures of how they see climate change in our community. So this could be another way that you do that research, that you have input into this process for people who might be less enthusiastic about engaging in a larger workshop. In Thunder Bay, I'm going to run through some of the challenges that we saw upcoming. With climate change, we have global warming, and we're worried about higher heat. This impacts more than anyone else the more vulnerable in our community, the chronically ill, the elderly, and the very young. So we're worried about their health. With warmer winters comes animals that are now surviving the winter more. In this picture, we have a black-legged tick, which is fairly new to Thunder Bay. It's sticking around more recently. We're seeing an increase in all tick levels, but these ticks in particular, we are more concerned about because they carry Lyme disease. And we're seeing some new invasive species. This plant is garlic mustard, and we are concerned about this because it can spread across the understory of a forest and take out some of the native plants there. Has a bit of fungicide in its roots, and it makes it harder for other plants to grow. But one of the big risks we see from climate change, and this is going to be, well, this is seen in many places, is a higher frequency and intensity of major storms. We've seen hailstorms, we've seen tornado, well, not in Thunder Bay, but in the region, tornadoes. We've been seeing weirder shoulder seasons. This was May a few years ago. We got a massive snowfall. Even this May, I think we've had snow and close to plus 30. And when we have the snow out of season, it can also have an impact on the local plants if they still have foliage when you start having those early snowfalls. And of course, we are worried about rain and flooding. So this is Thunder Bay in 2016. This is downtown area, well, not downtown, but close to the mall, well underwater, causes a massive amount of damage, issues transportation, traveling. Oh, that one I think I put out of order. But as we have these larger storms, we're just having all of this water that is exceeding the capacity of our systems to handle it. As you plan for storms, engineers will talk about a 100-year storm, a 50-year storm. So a 100-year storm is something that is expected to happen either 1% chance of it happening every year, or expected to happen once every 100 years. So essentially a once in a lifetime storm, normally. Now, Thunder Bay has had rainstorms that have counted as 100-year storms in 2008, 2012, and 2016. So something that someone might have expected to see once in their lifetime. Someone who is a teenager now in Thunder Bay may have seen 3 of these storms already. So at the end of the research stage, you should have some idea of what are the challenges facing the community? What are these? Is it flooding? Is it health? Is it food? And now it's time to start looking at the planning stage. How do we respond to these challenges? How do we respond to these new risks? In Thunder Bay, these were the areas that we decided on. Our emergency management. We know that there are major storms going to happen. We know that there are going to be problems. So figuring out how to respond to these better is an important area. Stormwater management, with more rain, how do we handle it? Will we do it more gray infrastructure, so the pipes, or green infrastructure, making use of our natural growth, or some combination between the two, like in low impact developments? Urban forestry, trees are helpful for us. Community planning, where things are being built, making sure that nothing's built in a floodplain, or displacing some valuable natural assets like a wetland, which can help save us from flooding. And for us, because we're quite concerned about our infrastructure, making sure that we have a plan for everything that we own, everything we're building, so that it is designed to handle the larger impacts of climate change. This is an example of our emergency management in 2012 of trying to respond to this massive flooding throughout our community. For those of you in Thunder Bay, if you go along Ford Street, this is the Nebing floodway. And some people actually think this is and I did too, that this was a more natural waterway before. But this is a large, dredged, purpose-built area for that when the Nebing is running high, it's not flooding your lower areas. This is part of Thunder Bay's stormwater management. In addition, we've built all of these low impact developments. This one, if you come to Thunder Bay, this is in front of Boston Pizza Memorial. So this is a very specialized piece of infrastructure that uses plants, it uses pipes, it uses everything working together. So what happens is that water flows into this garden rather than flowing off it, and it holds onto it. It can store an immense amount of water and lets it drain slowly through into pipes below. And what this does is that when you have too much water coming at once, that can flood an area. But if you spread that water out over 24 hours, your systems that you've already built, your ditches, your pipes, your culverts, they have a much better chance of doing it. And as an added bonus, it looks a lot nicer and it filters water going to Lake Superior so that we have a healthier lake to drink from. This was the planning process I talked about earlier. So this is what Thunder Bay City Plan kind of looks like, where you decide what gets built where and make sure that people aren't living in areas that are likely to be flooded, keeping people safe, keeping people from being hurt. So the planning stage will give you a list of actions. And some of those you will try and say, some of these are going to be quick and easy to do. Some of them are going to take longer. And as I said at the start, no one person can do all the actions. So the next step in this plan is, how do we approach this? If one of the actions is quick, it's easy, you've got someone who's eager to go, that might be a quick win action. Say, we're gonna move forward on this. But some of them might take a lot longer. But for each of the actions, what is helpful to do is to estimate a cost. And this can be very broad. In the Thunder Bay Adaptation Plan, it is just $1 sign, $2 sign, $3 sign. Is it cheap or is this super expensive? Just so that you get to prioritize things. How long something might take, and most importantly, who can help out doing this action. So in your community, this might not be saying, oh, Bill will do that. That might not be saying Erica will do this. But this will say, okay, this is a job for the community leadership. This is a job that might be best suited for hunters, for elders for, or the school, or even for the children to put together a project. Another area where having this list and helps for taking action is when opportunities that are normally somewhat unexpected pop up, like say, new source of funding. You get to look down this list and see, oh, this one matches up. We can do this action that we've already planned, rather than trying to start from scratch to come up with an idea. But no plan's going to be perfect right off the bat. So it's important to keep track of things. See what you've done, see what's helped the community, or see if there are impacts that you didn't plan on happening. So as you start seeing these changes, this is an opportunity to go back to those previous stages, change things, add things, take things away. Make sure that whatever plan you've put together here works for you. Now, what makes a good plan? So at the City of Thunder Bay, we have a large, it's over 100 pages. It's got a ton of actions, a lot of work went into it. And it's pretty, I love it. But the best plan is the one that you use and that helps the community. If you have put together a great plan that has good actions and it sits on a shelf, or no one feels engaged or involved with it, and it doesn't get used, that means it's not a great plan. We have a huge plan, but I've seen plans that are 2-3 pages long. And if they get used, if that's what people turn to, if it's on a poster and people look at that, and they think about that as they're going through their day-to-day actions, then that makes that the better plan than something that's huge and comprehensive. As well, you want to make sure that the actions in the plan go along with other things the community is doing. The end goal is to help the community. So if you're finding actions that are, so some of these actions should just be worked in with other things the community is doing, to think about as you're building a new road, as you're building new houses, as you're working on transportation. So if this is worked into different plans, integrated into other ideas, that's the end goal, where climate adaptation isn't something you do separately, but it's just worked into the way you do things. So the main point is that even though climate change is this huge global challenge, adaptation is a way for people, family, and communities to adjust and overcome these challenges. It's hard because it affects so many parts of our lives, and no one's an expert on all of it. But coming up with the climate adaptation plan is a good way to bring together a bunch of people in the community to get them involved and invested in the process and come up with actions that the community can work together on, can move forward on and can contribute their diverse views, their skills, and their ability to help make for a more resilient community in the future. Thank you.